Next, I'm going to cover very briefly what is on our agenda for today. First, we will introduce the Business Intelligence for Trade Enforcement, or BITE platform, and provide an overview of how big data analytics can be used by compliance teams to strengthen the supply chain security. Then we will demonstrate a set of use cases on the actual BITE platform. So we will have our team demonstrating in the platform the first use case, how to use BITE to quickly filter and reveal transactions that match on various international denied parties, and then how to vet statistical and analytic outputs to eliminate any false positives. The second use case will show how to track at-risk commodities for counterfeit shipments. So then we'll have a short, brief Q&A. And again, please put those questions in the chat box. So next up, I would like to introduce our presenters, starting with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Tim Gilday. So Tim, over to you. Hold on, Tim, can you unmute yourself?
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Tim Gilday. I have worked for customs enforcement for many decades. I retired in 2014, and we have been working in New Borders developing analytic solutions for the trade community. I am joined by my colleague, Ken McDonald, who also has worked for Homeland Security Investigations as an investigator. Could you say hello, Ken?
There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I, much like Tim, had about 30 years investigative experience with Department of Treasury, Customs Service, and then obviously with Homeland Security Investigations. I served overseas as an attaché, working with counterparts on counterproliferation investigations. And for a short period, I was responsible for the overall strategic investigations or counterproliferation programs at Homeland Security. And also my last few years, I worked on the White House Export Control Reform Task Force. And since that time, I've been working with private agencies within from NU Borders. I've also done consulting with DITRA and State Department experts in support of their programs.
Thank you, Ken. Michael, can you say hello? Tell us a bit about your background.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Ronayne. Prior to my arrival at New Borders, I also worked at the Department of Homeland Security. I was a special agent for over 20 years with Homeland Security Investigations. In my last role, I was the Assistant Special Agent in charge for the Global Trade Investigations Division at HSI in Boston. And prior to that, I was the unit chief for HSI's Counter-Proliferation Investigations Unit at HSI headquarters, where I was responsible for oversight of HSI's CPI program, or Counter-Proliferation Investigations Program, at the national level. Prior to that, I started my career in Philadelphia with U.S. Customs, and I was there 14 years as an investigator and as a group supervisor, and started, just about 20 years ago.
Thank you, Michael. Martin, can you say hello?
Good afternoon. My name is Martin Piatek. I am a data scientist here at New Borders. I'll be the one driving during the demos this afternoon. Before here, I served in a number of law enforcement, local and state law enforcement agencies as an intelligence and data analyst.
Thank you, Martin. So what we want to do today is to demonstrate this system that was built. As you hear by our presenters, we are out of the enforcement background for HSI, Customs, and we have particular focus on strategic trade controls, counterproliferation, and traditional customs fraud. So those are some of our enforcement areas that we worked in. And since being in the private sector, we have focused on building IT solutions for compliance, for the enforcement community, for licensing. And we're going to take you through a demonstration today of a system, the Border Intelligence for Trade Enforcement, and how it can assist you in your due diligence and KYC. Emma, if you could go to the next screen, I'd like to provide just a little context of where this system came out of and how it can be useful to you. So everyone has seen international trade grow tremendously in the past 20 years. And that trend will continue. We're going to see trade barriers continue to be lowered. More and more efficiencies are being implemented throughout trade flow. So we see streamlined import-export documentation processes. Now it's paperless in many areas, mandatory electronic submission for customs documentation, more and more trade agreements, single windows in different regions of the world for customs processing. All of these efficiencies are intended to minimize transport and customs wait times. So one of the consequences for the trade community, though, is as part of this emphasis on facilitation of trade, we're seeing governments, particularly in the case of the US, have placed the burden of compliance on the trade community. So our ability to execute effective due diligence, KYC, know your customer functions, or we would describe as compliance, it hasn't kept pace with the growth of international trade and the facilitation of these movement of these technologies and cargo and commodities, et cetera, et cetera. And in the compliance side, what we've seen from our work in the government and also in the private sector, there's a lot of manual steps still being used. So it's labor intensive. Our compliance functions, they're time consuming, and they're often less accurate, okay? So oftentimes we have to move between data systems. If we're looking at our, for instance, our customer base on a potential sale, and we're going into denied parties, we're moving in between data systems. We use manual files to track our compliance work and licensing functions. So what this demonstration is, and what we're about to show you, is a solution that we've come up with as former customs enforcement specialists and IT experts to automate that cross-border compliance work. So this system that we're showing you right now, it's based on the cloud. It allows you to bring in large data sets that we're going to show you in a few minutes. You can bring in unlimited watch lists, denied parties lists, HS filters, and bring it all into one place to allow you to automate a lot of the compliance processes that are currently being done manually. You see it once all the data is brought into the system and we bring in state-of-the-art tools, you can perform many functions. You can analyze the data. So at the top, you see in the top left, you can perform your analytics. You may be looking for suspicious transactions or anomalies in the data. You can train, you can use this Byte platform to train co-workers. We can train anyone that's interested in how to become a power user of the system. You can bring in your own data that's relevant to your own organization and integrate it into these other data sets. So it allows you to ingest data, limitless amount. So this is the Byte platform. It's advanced big data analytics, and it is focused on the compliance community to help them be more efficient and to identify those transactions that could cause them problems in their company. So if you go to the next screen, please. I will just tell you more and more countries now are putting their data out commercially, and that is manifest data. And that is not the same as the customs entry data, but it is very close in its characteristics and data elements that are included. So our system, because it is based on the cloud and a big data analytics system, allows us to ingest, we're up to, I think, 14, 15 countries, manifest data being the information that shippers and other companies involved in the movement of cargo provide to customs agencies prior to arrival of the shipment. That allows their customs and licensing agencies to perform risk management on those shipments prior to arrival. And what has occurred in the last 10 years, we see many countries, the US, China, Russia, many countries now that we have listed on the left have made that available. And there are several end uses that this can be applied to help us become more efficient in our compliance. Next screen, please, Emma. So we take that data. I think we're up to 300 million manifest transactions around the globe, including the US. And what we do is enrich that data by bringing in other data sets and joining it to the manifest data. So we bring in, for instance, the US consolidated screening list, what be it for commerce, state, or treasury, and we join those to the same data elements within the manifest data. So we know before we begin to do our analysis in a manifest record, whether that the party, the shipper, the importer, or consignee, however you want to term it, whether they are a denied party. And we bring in all of these available data sets for denied parties and join that to the data. And you can perform that function with your own data in Byte. We're able, down the bottom left, you see we bring in harmonized tariff specialized filters that we built for dual use codes, for ones that are relevant to commodities that are at risk for counterfeiting, and also for anti-dumping duty orders. And we can break this data down however we want. We can break it down by NATO region, by ASEAN. We can focus in on corporate IDs. However we want to look at the data, we can do that with a very quick time to answer. Previously, if you wanted to do this type of analysis on the data, you'd have to go to an IT expert, a contractor, have them write a search algorithm, run it through the data set. And it took a long time to get the answer back. What has changed now in the big data analytic platform that we've developed is you can run those queries with a very, very short time to answer. Might be within a second. You can run it through 300 million records and be able to get these the critical information you need to identify at-risk shipments. Next screen, please. So Emma, why don't you take us through the use cases that Martin will show us, and we'll get started on looking at this.
Great. So I'm actually gonna add everyone who's on our team to the spotlight. So we have a first use case here based on export compliance, and I'm gonna introduce Mike to give an additional bit of operational background.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, Martin's going to show you this export compliance use case, but a couple quick points before he gets started. Obviously, we all want a strong compliance program, and ensuring that proper screening is part of that is obviously critical. As an agent who investigated export violations and as a unit chief with oversight of HSI's program, one of the questions we dealt very often with industry, and one of the questions we heard most frequently was, how do I know where these lists reside? How do I properly screen my new customers? Is it possible for you to do it for us? And I understand the questions. Excuse me. I understand the questions, and it is critical because as an agent, if something were to go wrong, my questions would be, what level of compliance program do you have? What level of due diligence did you exercise throughout the entire transaction? So understandably, the screening process can be a bit challenging, but it is something that you need to get right, because if something should occur, and even if it doesn't meet, something that's considered to be criminal, an intentional act, you still can expose yourself to penalties, to include fines, and even in some cases, the loss of export privileges. So knowing your customer is critical, and in ensuring that you do the proper screening is imperative. So Martin now is going to bring you through the use case, and he's going to show how you can utilize the Byte platform to automate the screening process.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to go ahead and share my desktop. Hopefully everyone can see that. And we've landed here on one of the dashboards that we've built in the Byte platform. Now we use Kibana for our visualizations, and if you're familiar with that engine, all of that should look pretty familiar to you. And I want to show just exactly how fast that is and that time to answer. So what we've done here, what we're looking at here rather, is several countries worth of manifest data. As you can see at the top of the screen, I've got a timeline as to what date range this covers. And I'm looking at Vietnamese and Russian imports and exports. But we're going to look specifically to our Russian export data set. And in order to do that, I'm going to use these drop downs that we've built into the dashboard. So all of these are pre-populated, and they're going to be visible to your analyst or to whoever's working on this. They're not going to be required to do any kind of further work than simply what we're doing here, which is selecting that we want the latest set and only Russian data. And you can see that narrows us down to just the 31 million manifests that cover this 2019 to middle of 2020 period. What I'm going to do then is I'm going to go back to the dropdown, and I'm going to select only exports. And that's going to take me down to around 3 million records. And then I'll draw your attention over here to this next control bar. This dashboard, the entire dashboard actually, is connected. So every time I use one of these filters to filter down information, it applies that to everything that's being displayed. And those are all the counts and the maps. So you can see some of these are not mapped now. Countries of origins are not relevant since we're only looking at exports. And we see that they're not displayed anymore. But what I want to do now is I want to look for consignees that are denied. Now, as Tim and Mike mentioned, these are lists that are published by the US, the EU, UN, other government entities and non-government entities. And what they'll do is list names, individuals, company names, addresses, and we'll take all of that information and ingest that. And then using the Byte platform, we'll run it against the manifests. We'll do that against the consignee and the shipper field, or the exporters and shippers, depending on what the data set requires. And then when I select down here that I want true matches on consignees, it'll show me those 2,300 records that are in fact matching. Now, I'm going to go off this screen for just a second before we continue, because unlike other systems, in Kibana, or in Byte rather, we do not hide how close those matches are. So we've got the Boolean value that I just showed you as a true or false. This is a denied match, or this is not a denied match. But we also show you this second value, which is the certainty of our matches. Now, if you imagine the word Apple being on the denied party list and matching the consignee name Apple, obviously, we don't want to be defeated if it is listed as Apple Inc. or Apple LLC, LTD, any of those other variants. Misspellings added commas, any of those things that would completely defeat a one-for-one search. By using our fuzzy matching method, we're able to actually get those values back. And we're also able to show you just how close. So here we see that most commonly we've got about 75% match, which means that about 75% of the characters are the same as what we have on our denied party list. You can turn this up or down based on your use case. You can spread the net very wide and have a lot of records to vet, or you can increase it to perfect one-for-one matches, although that does defeat the purpose a little bit. So I just wanted to show you, in this case, we're looking at imports specifically, and we're seeing the kind of layout of how close those are. And why that's relevant is we'll go back over here and we'll look at those 2000 records, and we'll see of interest some companies that we may recognize. But before I do that, I'm going to go back up and I'm going to use another one of our filters. Now, Tim also mentioned that we use HTS filters or HS filters, and those are based on the manifest's HS code. These are 10-digit codes, of which 6 digits will be internationally consistent, the same. The first 2 will give you a chapter, and the idea being that they'll identify what is in the shipment. So we've partnered with subject matter experts in a variety of fields, and what they do for us is they'll give us a list, in this case for advanced weapons, and they'll say this list of particular HS codes, if you see it, it is of interest, relevant to these potential weapon systems. When I apply that filter, you can see now that I'm being quite specific with what I'm looking for in the data, and that I've actually done nothing further than use these dropdowns. And I'm looking at 32 transactions over this year in Russian exports. So these are consignees that are listed on a variety of these lists, and I'll speak to that more in just a second. And that the HS code in those transactions is potentially of interest based on our subject matter experts. So when I come down here, I am not a veteran of this field, but my coworkers here are, but Poly Technologies is what they term as a recognizable name. I'll go back to the fuzzy matching here, because as you can see, Poly Technologies, which is on our list, comes up in a variety of ways with different spellings, different punctuation, different spacing. None of that defeats us. We see it. And when we come down here and we select one of these particular ones, you can see that the entire dashboard now changes. We see exactly the direction. We see the HS codes. It makes sense that they would be similar since that's what our subject matter experts provided. And when I look at this record, this is the actual manifest itself. It's got not only the match, but because it has a denied match, Byte feeds back all the information that is relevant. So all the information that, in this case, I'll scroll down, this comes from the Bureau of Industry and Security. All of the information that they provided on their denied match, well, it shows up here. I've got links for more information. I've got the list. I've got the date where it was listed. I've got the addresses that they're known to be associated with. All of this data is available for me here. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ken if you want to speak to the vetting here and the importance of it.
Thanks, Martin. As you know, vetting is probably the most critical part of any compliance program. And it's easy just to apply names against the list to see if it's a positive or a negative, and there's lots of automated systems out there, but no matter how good the system is, you have to continually involve the human factor because of the possibility of false positives or matching of similar names. So you always have to go back into the system The ability to quickly go right to the exact list that it came from in our system gives you secondary ways to check it, addresses, aliases, things of that nature. But the human factor is critical, and you don't want to lose a sale because of a false hit that showed up positive, but truly wasn't the one individual on the program or on the list. The other thing you want to keep in mind is the system gives you the ability, even if they're not positive hits on the vetting, it gives you the ability to look into their other activities internationally, see who trading, if they show up in our system with all the different trade sets, gives you the ability to see what type of businesses and transactions they're conducting with what countries and what type of commodities. So it gives you a better idea of who you are dealing with as a customer. And as Mike pointed out, knowing your customer is critical for you to prevent you from any potential liabilities as you continue on with transactions. If a transaction comes up under any kind of scrutiny further on down the line.
Thanks, Ken. So I'm gonna go ahead and try to use technology and share my screen again, although we may.
There you go, Emma.
How'd it go? Oh, great. You fixed the issue. Great. So the second use case, I'm going to throw over to Tim to discuss a little more detail on the import compliance operational background, and then Martin will take us back into the platform. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Emma. So our first use case, it focused on export enforcement, export compliance, denied parties, but the system is very dynamic, very flexible, the BITE system. And it also has tremendous capabilities for import compliance. So if you're focused on counterfeit shipments or anti-dumping duty shipments or IPR infringements, whatever it is, we can use the same data and apply the same types of rules to look for significant violations. And we're going to walk you through an IPR, counterfeit example right now with Martin.
Thanks, Tim. So we'll go back into the BITE platform, and we've got another dashboard here already prepped for us. And we're going to go ahead and look at Apple again, only because they're very ubiquitous. And the first thing that I want to show that is kind of defeated by the demo that we did first, where we use the data elements, is that there is also a very powerful just open text query to BITE. So I'm just going to look for Apple. Now, obviously, when I do this query, I'm going to get returns that include not only the manufacturer of trendy phones, but also custard apples, apple boars, and pies, and so on. So these are not really relevant items. Now, in the previous use case, we discussed HS codes and how they actually have a wealth of information within them. One of those is the fact that the first 2 digits establish the so-called chapter of the shipment. And if we just apply the HS code, we'll be able to look specifically at ones that are going to be related. Now, chapter 85 is electrical machinery and equipment, parts thereof. So we're gonna say that that's going to be more relevant to our query here. And we can see that that's knocked us down to just 7,000 results, as opposed to the 80,000, I believe we started with.
Great. And also, just to continue on, as Kenny was describing, the human intelligence is an important factor in trying to discern whether these transactions that we're showing are of interest. And we want to keep that in the vetting loop, right? So as Martin has demonstrated, you can pull up Apple and find all sorts of matches, but this system quickly allows you to go right down to the needles in the haystack to see the ones that are relevant to your enforcement requirements. That's important. Other products just give you a black box and you don't know what matched or why it matched or how it matched. But with this system, you're able to control that. And as we say, you want to keep that human intelligence factor in all of the due diligence and the vetting processes. We could pick any commodity. We could look at, dial soap. We can go across all the data elements within the manifest record. So it looks within the commodity description, but it looks in all other fields as well. And that's fairly unique to be able to churn through 300 million records looking for a specific commodity or brand name. And the time to answer is very, very short, as we're demonstrating here. So it's a very powerful product for IPR protection, to identify counterfeit. In this case, we're looking at Indian shipments. There's a lot that goes through India that are subject to counterfeit. And we just picked Apple, but any other commodity type, any other name that you're interested in, we could run it through and look for these very quickly. Go ahead, Martin.
Sure. Yeah, and I just want to point out too that it's the combination thereof. So we've got this unstructured query that we just did. We looked for Apple. We narrowed it down to the chapter that's relevant, but we've got our structured data elements that are also of use now. For one, I can see that in the consignee list, I've got Apple distribution. And since we're looking for shipments that are illegal or that are violating IPR, well, these are going to probably be legitimate and relevant to the company, and we can actually filter them out, as simple as that. I'm going to do the same thing with Foxconn because they're manufactured for them. And see, now this brings up shipping companies, and we've still got some matches that we need to vet out because they're just a similarly named company. But we're also seeing that we've now removed all of the relevant information and we're still getting iPhone and Apple products.
Yeah, and then that's the sweet spot there on the bottom right. When you see shipping companies dealing in these commodities, obviously, those would be the ones of interest from an enforcement perspective. And we got down from the 300 million. Now you can see the 3,200 ones, and what we like to describe that as is removing the hay from the haystack so that you can better see the needles. You can use any type of filter, any type of analytic approach. We're just demonstrating a few today, but your experience with your commodities and your enforcement requirements will dictate how you would run the queries. But this is just intended to show you a few examples of how quickly it can be done and how efficiently. Thank you, Martin.
Yep. Thank you, Tim.
Emma?
Yep. Thank you, team. So I'm going to share once again.
Okay. So we're showing you the Byte 2.0. It's a web-based application, and it has a case management tool, which is important. So in addition to all of the manifest data that we showed, all of the watch lists of denied parties, and all of those other filters, there, and we can get into more detail in our next demonstration, but we have a case management tool that allows you to capture all these queries, all the information necessary for your compliance program, and eliminate folders or printing out documents and maintaining folders. It essentially gives you a paperless compliance system. So it's all brought into this Byte platform, and it is very efficient when you're just clicking and moving things around. And that is the ultimate goal, is much as we said at the beginning of this presentation, how the trade community has emphasized facilitation, paperless transactions, et cetera, we want to build those capabilities within the compliance side as well. And this is a very good way to eliminate a lot of the steps that are involved in the compliance processes. So it is a case management tool that is available in addition to all of those data sets. And what you see down at the bottom, you will have access to all the trade data, the screening list. We enhance the manifest data with the screening list. And you can, on the last bullet to the right on the bottom, you can bring in all your data and do the same on all your transactions. And it has all the privacy and firewalls necessary to protect your company information. You can access the bulk data within Byte, and you can, there's an API function that allows you to go in and access the system as well from your company. So at the very top, we see some of the functionality of it by putting it on a data analytics system in the cloud, bringing in all these data sets, joining them together. You can analyze a limitless amount of data. This system has, as Mark was demonstrating on the dashboards, has very good visualization tools and reporting capabilities, so you can share the information. And again, you can manage your compliance and enforcement cases through the case management tool, and you can export that within your company or whatever requirements that are needed for you to share the information. We provide training exercises so you can learn how to use these analytic tools to augment and to support your import-export compliance functions. It's very intuitive. In a very short period of time, you can become a power user. And if you have an interest, we can bring you in, train you, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you can master this. Very intuitive. We will continue to hold these demos in the upcoming year. And this is our first session in showing the Byte 2.0. But we will continue to roll out capabilities in these short meetings, usually at lunchtime, half hour long. And lastly, I just let you know, if you are interested in it, you can access the system in the cloud from your company. We can install an instance within your system as well. There's several different options on how you can integrate this within your business processes. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks so much, Tim. So that's really all we had for today. We would be happy to stay on for an additional 5 or 10 minutes if anyone has questions. Feel free to use the chat function. There's also a Q&A function, or you can raise your hand and we can allow you to speak. And then I dropped our email into the chat box. It is byte@newborders.com. Feel free to email us. You can also visit our website at newborders.com. And then otherwise, yeah, have a great afternoon. And thank you so much for your time today. And we'll be in touch about our next webinar, as Tim mentioned, upcoming in the new year.